What if everything you've been told about success is wrong? What if the guy driving the beat-up Honda Civic, wearing a plain white t-shirt, and eating a home-cooked meal instead of posting Michelin star dinners on Instagram is actually the richest person in the room? And what if the guy in the Gucci belt, the leased BMW, and the designer sneakers is quietly drowning in debt he can't admit to anyone? Here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. Most of the wealth you see around you is fake. And most of the poverty? It's also fake. The world has flipped, and the people who figured this out first are quietly building empires while everyone else is burning money to look like they already have one. But here's where it gets really interesting. And this is the part most people never figure out. It's not just about money, it's about power. It's about psychology. It's about who actually has control over their life and who just looks like they do. And by the time this video is done, you're going to see the world in a completely different way. You're going to start noticing things you can never unnotice. If that kind of shift in perspective matters to you, take just a second right now and hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Because what you're about to hear isn't hustle culture fluff or motivational noise. This is real. This is the stuff the wealthy don't talk about at dinner parties, and the broke don't realize until it's too late. Let's start with a man named James. James grew up in a middle-class neighborhood outside of Nashville. His parents worked hard. They weren't rich, but they weren't struggling either. And the one thing his dad always told him was this: "Son, if you want people to respect you, you have to look the part." That lesson stuck. So James spent his 20s doing exactly that. He bought nice clothes he couldn't quite afford. He leased a car that cost more than his rent. He went to the right restaurants and posted pictures at the right places. When people asked how he was doing, he always said, "Amazing. Things are really taking off." But behind the scenes, James was living paycheck to paycheck. He had almost no savings. He had credit card debt that was slowly eating him alive. He was working a job he hated just to fund a lifestyle that was slowly killing his future. And the worst part? He couldn't stop. Because stopping felt like admitting failure. It felt like telling everyone who watched his Instagram that the whole thing had been a performance. James was caught in a trap that millions of people are stuck in right now without even knowing it. And the name of that trap is status theatre. Status theatre is when you spend your real resources, your time, your money, your energy, performing wealth instead of building it. It's the gap between how you look and how you actually live. And in America today, that gap is wider than it has ever been in history. But here's what changed everything for James. And this is the part most people never get to hear. One afternoon, he ran into his old college friend Marcus at a grocery store. Marcus was wearing a plain grey hoodie and beat-up New Balance sneakers. He drove a 2012 Toyota Camry. He was buying the store brand cereal. James almost didn't recognize him because Marcus looked, honestly, kind of average. Nothing flashy, nothing impressive. But when they sat down for coffee and caught up, James found out that Marcus had quietly paid off his house. He had over $400,000 in investments. He owned 2 small businesses. He had no debt, none. And he woke up every morning with the kind of freedom that James had spent years pretending to have. And in that moment, something cracked open inside James. Because he realized that Marcus didn't look rich, but Marcus was rich. And James looked rich, but James was broke. That's the inversion. That's the shift that this whole video is about. Because somewhere along the way, our culture got things completely backwards. We started confusing the costume with the character. We started mistaking the signal for the substance. We started believing that if something looked like success, it must be success. And that belief is costing an entire generation its future. Let's talk about the psychology of why this happens. Because it's not your fault. This is deeply wired into how human beings work. There's a concept in psychology called social signaling. It goes back tens of thousands of years. In early human tribes, the way you showed your value to the group was through visible displays. You wore the feathers of the bird you hunted. You displayed the skins of the animals you killed. You showed your trophies. And this made sense back then because in a small tribe of maybe 50 people, everyone knew everyone. So your signals were accurate. If you had the wolf pelt, you actually hunted the wolf. But now we live in cities of millions. We have Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, and the signals got disconnected from the substance. Anyone can rent the penthouse for a weekend and take a photo. Anyone can buy a designer bag on a payment plan. Anyone can dress like a millionaire while living like someone who's one emergency away from catastrophe. The signal became cheap, but our brains never updated their software. We still respond to the signal the same way our ancestors responded to the wolf pelt. We still assume that the person who looks wealthy must have done something to deserve it. And the marketers, the retailers, the banks, they all know this. They've spent billions of dollars studying it, exploiting it, and building entire industries around it. They know that if they can make you feel like buying this product makes you look successful, you'll buy it, even if it makes you less successful in real life. This is the trap, and it's everywhere. Think about the last time you bought something you didn't really need. What was going through your mind? Be honest. Was it partly about how it would look? Was it partly about the story it would tell? Was it partly about what other people would think? If the answer is yes, you're not weak or shallow, you're human. But the question is, are you going to stay trapped in that programming? Or are you going to start making a different choice? Because here's the truth about the people who are actually building wealth in silence. They made a decision, often early and often quietly, to stop playing the performance. They opted out of the status theatre, and it changed everything. There's a famous study done by researchers Thomas Stanley and William Danko. They spent years studying actual millionaires in America, not the ones on TV, not the ones with the Lamborghinis, real, everyday millionaires. People who had quietly accumulated $1 million or more in real net worth. And what they found shocked almost everyone who read it. The average millionaire in America drives a used car. They live in a modest house in a regular neighborhood. They wear regular clothes from regular stores. They clip coupons. They eat at home more than they eat out. They don't wear their wealth on the outside because they're too busy building it on the inside. Stanley and Danko called these people prodigious accumulators of wealth. And the single biggest thing that separated them from people with high incomes who weren't wealthy was this. They didn't care what you thought about their stuff. They had completely decoupled their identity from their possessions. Now compare that to the person Stanley and Danko called the under-accumulator of wealth. High income, nice things, impressive lifestyle, and almost nothing saved. Almost no actual net worth behind the curtain. Two different people. One looks rich, one is rich. And most people, if they saw them both on the street, would get them completely backwards. That's the world we live in. And if you're watching this and feeling something click, that's important. Hold on to that feeling because it's about to get even deeper. Let me tell you about a different kind of man. His name, for the purposes of this story, is David. David grew up poor. Not pretend poor, actually poor. He wore hand-me-downs to school. His family drove a car with a cracked windshield that they taped up with plastic every winter. He got free lunch at school, and he remembers the shame of that vividly. He remembers wanting, more than almost anything, to one day have nice things, to never feel that shame again. So when David started making money in his mid-20s, he went hard. He bought the things he couldn't have as a kid. He dressed well. He drove well. He lived in a nice apartment. And it felt amazing for about 6 months. But then something strange happened. The things stopped feeling like freedom. They started feeling like a leash. because now he had to keep making money just to maintain the life he'd built. The apartment cost what it cost. The car payment was what it was. The lifestyle demanded a certain income just to survive. And if anything went wrong, if he lost a client, got sick, or the economy shifted, everything would collapse like a house of cards. David had spent his whole life running from the feeling of poverty, and without realizing it, he'd built a life that made him financially fragile in a whole new way. He looked successful, but he was one bad month away from crisis. The turning point came when David read a book by Warren Buffett's biographer. He read about how Buffett still lives in the same house he bought in 1958 in Omaha, Nebraska. He read about how Buffett drives his own car, pays reasonable prices for his meals, and has spent decades not changing his lifestyle, despite being one of the wealthiest people in human history. And David thought, what is Buffett doing that I'm not? What does he understand that I'm missing? The answer is this. Warren Buffett is not performing wealth. He is not trying to signal status to strangers. He is not trying to feel rich. He is too busy being rich. See, there's a massive difference between feeling rich and being rich. Feeling rich is about consumption. It's about what you buy, what you wear, what you drive, what you post. Being rich is about creation. It's about what you build, what you own, what works for you while you sleep, what survives a bad year. Feeling rich requires a constant audience. Being rich doesn't require anyone's approval. And the moment David understood that, everything changed. He downsized his apartment. He paid off his car and bought a used one with cash. He stopped buying things to signal status and started only buying things that either served a real function or brought him genuine joy. And every dollar he freed up went to work building something real. 3 years later, David had more actual financial security than he'd ever had in his life. He didn't look rich, but he felt something far more powerful than looking rich. He felt free. Now I want to pause here for a second, because this is the moment in the conversation where most people get it wrong. They hear this message and they think it means you're supposed to be cheap. It means you should never buy anything nice. It means enjoying life is somehow bad. That is not the message. The message is about intention. It's about the difference between spending from a place of abundance and spending from a place of scarcity. It's about the difference between buying something because it genuinely serves your life and buying something because you're trying to fill an emotional hole or earn someone else's approval. You can have nice things. You can enjoy the fruits of your work. The question is, who is in control? Are you controlling your spending, or is your spending controlling you? The wealthy don't deny themselves real pleasure. They just stopped wasting money on fake signals. Here's where things get really interesting, because this isn't just about financial behavior. This goes much deeper into who you are and who you're becoming. There's a psychological concept called identity foreclosure. It happens when a person defines themselves so tightly around something external, a job title, a lifestyle, a brand, that they lose the ability to grow beyond it. They become trapped in the performance because the performance has become them. This is why so many high-income people with impressive-looking lives are quietly miserable. Not because money is bad or success is hollow, but because they've confused the costume for the character. They've built an identity around how they look to others, and now they can't stop without feeling like they're disappearing. This is the deepest trap of status theatre. It's not just financial, it's existential. It robs you of the freedom to evolve. The truly wealthy, the people who are free in the deepest sense, they built their identity around something that no market crash can touch, no recession can repossess, no bad year can take away. They built their identity around who they actually are, their values, their discipline, their character, their vision. And because of that, they can drive the beat-up car without it threatening their sense of self. They can wear the plain clothes without feeling like they've failed. They can decline the expensive dinner and not feel embarrassed. Because their self-worth is not rented from other people's opinions. That's the real wealth, the internal wealth. And it makes the external wealth possible. Think about someone in your life who you genuinely respect. Not someone who impressed you on Instagram. Not someone who you envied because of their stuff. Someone you actually respect, deep down, when you really think about it. I'd be willing to bet that person's respect didn't come from what they owned. It came from who they were. Their reliability, their character, the way they carried themselves in hard moments, the way they treated people, their word. That's the signal that actually matters, and you can't fake it with a watch. Now let me drop something on you that might be the most counterintuitive thing in this entire video. Are you ready? Looking poor on purpose, staying below the radar, intentionally not showing off your wealth, is one of the most powerful strategic advantages available to you in the modern world. Here's why. When you look average, you move through the world without friction. Salespeople don't target you. Scammers don't come for you. Fake friends don't appear. Your family doesn't call asking for money every other week. Your co-workers don't resent you. Your landlord doesn't jack up your rent the moment he thinks you can pay it. There's a concept in military strategy called low observable. It's about reducing your signature on the radar. When you're not broadcasting your position, you can move more freely. You can build in peace. You can accumulate without interference. The wealthiest people in America have been practicing this for decades. Old money families in the South and Northeast have a well-known culture of understated dress, modest cars, and fierce privacy. Not because they're ashamed, because they understand that privacy is protection, and that invisibility is a superpower. Now think about what happens when you do the opposite, when you broadcast everything, when you lease the status symbol and park it in front of your apartment, when you wear the brand on your chest, when you post the vacation before you've even finished paying for it. You become a target. Not just for criminals, though that's real too, but a target for every manipulator, every mooch, every person who sees your signal and immediately calculates what they can extract from you. And beyond the practical cost, there's a deeper cost. Every dollar you spend on the signal is a dollar not building the substance. Every hour you spend performing is an hour not producing. The gap between the look and the reality gets wider and wider and harder to close. This is what happened to a young man I'll call Andre. Andre grew up in Atlanta. He was smart, driven, charismatic. By 26, he had a good income from his sales job, and he started investing a little on the side. Nothing major, but he was building something real. And then he got his first big commission check. About $40,000, and instead of investing it or putting it toward the future he was slowly building, he bought a car. A $60,000 car that he financed. Because he thought, I've earned this. I deserve this. I want people in my neighborhood to see that I made it. And for about a month, it felt incredible. People noticed. People commented. The women who hadn't looked at him before suddenly looked. His old friends were impressed. He felt like he'd finally crossed some invisible line into success. But then the payments started. $800 a month. Insurance went up. Maintenance on a luxury vehicle is not cheap. And suddenly, his investment account, which had been growing steadily, stopped growing. The money that was supposed to go to work for him went to the car that was depreciating every single day. 3 years later, the car was worth half what he paid for it. And the investment account that could have been worth $80,000 or more with consistent contributions was still sitting where it had been the night he drove that car off the lot. Andre hadn't become less successful, but he had become less free. The car was a ball and chain disguised as a trophy. And the saddest part? The people who were impressed in month 1 didn't care anymore by month 3. The girls who looked at the car were looking at somebody else's car now. The old friends had moved on. The signal had faded. But the payments were still there. That is status theatre in its most brutal form. You paid real money, real future, real freedom for a fleeting feeling that didn't even last. Here's what I need you to understand, because this is where the conversation shifts. We've been talking about what not to do, and that matters. But the deeper lesson here is not about subtraction. It's about substitution. It's about what you build when you stop building the performance. Because here's what happens when a person finally opts out of status theatre and channels those resources into something real. The money that was going to the car payment goes to an investment account. That account starts compounding. Slowly at first, then faster, then much faster. Einstein supposedly called compound interest the 8th wonder of the world. And while that quote may be apocryphal, the math behind it is absolutely real. Money that works for you grows in a way that money spent on status never can. The time that was going to curating the Instagram feed goes to learning a skill, building a business, developing a product, writing a book, starting a side income that over time becomes a main income. The emotional energy that was going to managing other people's opinions goes to managing your own mind. And a mind that is not constantly seeking outside validation is a mind that is capable of extraordinary focus. This is the compound effect of opting out. It doesn't feel like much in month 1. It doesn't feel like much in year 1. But in year 5 and year 10 and year 20, the person who made this shift is almost unrecognizable compared to the person who stayed in the performance. And this brings us to something I want you to think about really carefully, because this is the identity shift that separates the people who eventually break free from the people who stay stuck. It comes down to this question: who are you building your life for? If the honest answer is other people, then you're on the hamster wheel and you know it. Because other people's opinions are bottomless. You can never buy enough to satisfy them. You can never reach a finish line that moves every time you get close. The person who lives for other people's approval is a person whose life is controlled by other people's standards, and those standards will never be fully met. But if the answer is myself and the people I genuinely love, then suddenly everything simplifies. You don't need the performance. You don't need the validation. You need to build something real, something that actually serves you, something that survives and grows and creates real security and real freedom for you and the people who matter. That's the freedom on the other side of this shift. And it is worth more than any car, any outfit, any rented lifestyle. I want you to drop a comment right now. Just tell me one thing you've bought in the last year that was more about the signal than the substance. No judgment. I've been there too. Everybody has. The comment section is a safe space, because acknowledging it is the first step to breaking the pattern. Now let's get into something that I think is genuinely underestimated: the hidden social benefits of looking ordinary. There's a researcher at Harvard named Michael Norton who did a fascinating study on what he called the misery of the conspicuous consumer. What he found was that people who spend heavily on visible luxury items don't actually report higher happiness over time. In fact, they often report lower satisfaction with life than people who spend the same money on experiences or on others. But there was something even more surprising. The conspicuous consumers also reported having fewer genuine, deep relationships. Because the signal they were sending, consciously or not, was, "I'm better than you." And that signal repels the kind of people who might have become real friends, and attracts the kind of people who are only interested in what you can do for them. Meanwhile, the person who shows up without the performance, who doesn't try to dominate the social hierarchy with their stuff, creates space for authentic connection. They're easier to talk to, easier to trust, less threatening. and therefore surrounded by people who like them for who they actually are. This is not a small thing. Loneliness is a genuine epidemic in America right now, and a huge driver of that loneliness is the culture of performance. When everyone is performing, no one can connect. Because connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires you to set down the costume. The person who opts out of the performance doesn't just gain financial freedom, they gain social freedom. The ability to walk into any room and just be themselves, without the armor, without the strategy, without the constant calculation of how they're being perceived. That ease, that groundedness, that's magnetic. And it doesn't cost a thing. Let me tell you about a woman named Sarah. Sarah was a marketing executive in Chicago. Sharp, ambitious, well-dressed. She made good money and she spent accordingly. Designer everything. Luxury apartment in the right neighborhood. The full performance. And her social circle was large and, on the surface, impressive. But one day, she got laid off. Unexpectedly. The kind of thing that comes out of nowhere and lands like a punch to the stomach. And almost immediately, she found out what her social circle was actually made of. The invitation stopped. The group chats went quiet. The people who had been so present when she was the marketing executive with the corner office and the impressive wardrobe became unavailable. Not out of cruelty, necessarily, but because the thing that had connected them was the performance. And the performance was over. Sarah spent the next year rebuilding, and she made a decision in that year that changed everything. She stopped trying to look like who she used to be. She moved into a cheaper apartment. She wore simpler clothes. She drove her old car. She started showing up as the real version of herself, the uncertain, figuring it out, genuinely human version. And the people she attracted in that period of stripping everything away were different. They were real. They were loyal. They showed up when things were hard, because the relationship wasn't built on her status. It was built on who she actually was. By the time Sarah rebuilt her career, she had something she hadn't had before. A real community. A real foundation. And she never went back to the performance. Not because she couldn't afford to, but because she no longer wanted to. The stripping away had revealed something more valuable than anything she'd worn before. Here's the real truth about looking poor being the new rich. And this is the big one. The thing that pulls everything together. We are living in an era of information overload, of constant noise, of 1,000 competing signals every single hour of every single day. Everyone is broadcasting. Everyone is performing. Everyone is trying to look like something. And because of that, almost nothing stands out anymore. In a world of noise, silence is power. In a world of performance, authenticity is magnetic. In a world where everyone is trying to look like they've arrived, the person who is quietly, genuinely building something real is the most interesting person in the room. This is why the understated aesthetic is having a cultural moment. Old money style, quiet luxury. The intentional choice of the plain, functional, high quality but low visibility option. It's not just a trend, it's a reaction. It's the culture slowly recognizing that the loud performance has become so ubiquitous that it has lost its power. The signal has been inflated to worthlessness. The new power move is not to signal at all. It's to show up so genuinely, so grounded, so clearly yourself that you don't need the costume. The confidence that comes from not needing anyone's approval is more visible, more attractive, and more powerful than any brand logo on the planet. Think about the most compelling people you've ever encountered. In person, not on a screen. The ones who made you feel something real. I'd bet most of them weren't performing. They were just present. Fully themselves. Completely unconcerned with your opinion of their outfit. That quality, that radical self-possession, is what we're really talking about. The money stuff is just the surface layer. Underneath it is something much more fundamental. The freedom to be exactly who you are without apology. And you cannot buy that. You can only build it. Now let's bring this home with something practical. Because I don't want this to be a video that leaves you inspired for 20 minutes and then fades. I want this to actually change something. Here are the mental shifts that separate the people who live this out from the people who just agree with it when they hear it. The first shift is from short-term approval to long-term freedom. Every time you're about to make a purchase or a decision to signal status, ask yourself, am I buying this for me, or am I buying this for the person who might see it? That question alone will save you tens of thousands of dollars over a decade. The second shift is from identity by possession to identity by character. Your net worth is not your self-worth. Your car is not your value. Your zip code is not your character. These things are external and temporary. Your discipline, your integrity, your ability to keep going when it's hard, those are yours. Build those, protect those. The third shift is from consumption to creation. Every dollar, every hour, every ounce of energy is a resource. The person who channels those resources into building something real is on a fundamentally different trajectory than the person who channels them into maintaining a performance. Ask yourself every day, am I consuming today or am I creating today? The fourth shift is from performance to presence. Stop performing your life and start living it. Stop showing people what you have and start building what matters. The audience you're playing to is mostly not paying as much attention as you think, but your future self is watching everything. And the fifth shift, maybe the most important, is from scarcity to sufficiency. A lot of the status theatre is driven by a deep fear of not being enough. If I can just get to the next level, buy the next thing, achieve the next milestone, then I'll feel like enough. But that feeling never comes from the outside. It can only come from the inside. And the moment you genuinely internalize that you are enough right now, exactly as you are, the performance becomes unnecessary. And everything changes. Let me tell you how James's story ended. Remember James from the beginning? The guy from Nashville who was living a performance while drowning in debt? After the conversation with Marcus at the coffee shop, James didn't make a dramatic overnight change. It took about a year. He started small. He stopped upgrading his phone every year. He made his own coffee instead of buying it every morning. He started paying extra on his credit card debt every month. He started reading about money and investing and psychology. He started to notice the gap between how he looked and how he actually lived. And instead of feeling shame about it, he started treating it like a project, a problem to be solved. He sold the leased car and bought a used one with cash. He moved into a smaller apartment when his lease ended. He started telling the truth when people asked how he was doing, not the polished performance version, just the honest one. I'm working on some things, trying to get my financial foundation solid, and something unexpected happened. People respected that more than the performance. The friends who mattered leaned in. The ones who only wanted the performance drifted away. And James found he didn't miss them. 3 years after that coffee shop conversation, James had paid off all his credit card debt. He had a 6-month emergency fund. He had a growing investment account. He drove a car that no one was impressed by. He lived in an apartment that didn't look like a lifestyle brand. And he felt, for the first time in his adult life, genuinely free. Not Instagram free, not performance free, actually free. The kind of free where you wake up in the morning and you don't have to pretend anything. Where your outside and your inside finally match. Where the gap is closed. That is the destination this conversation is pointing toward. Now, I want to be honest with you about something. This shift is not easy. It is genuinely hard to stop caring about what other people think. We live in a culture that hammers us with signals every single day. The algorithm knows what makes you feel inadequate, and it serves it to you on a loop. The ads know what insecurities to poke. The influencers are paid to make you feel like your life is missing something that their lifestyle has. It takes real, active, conscious resistance to opt out of that machine. It takes a willingness to look average in a world that worships spectacle. It takes confidence that most people never fully develop. But here's what I want you to hold on to. The people who develop that confidence, who actually live this out, they report something consistently across almost every culture, every age group, every income level. They say the same thing. I wish I had done this sooner. Not because the simpler life is always easier, but because it's theirs. Because it's real. Because they can look in the mirror and see someone who is building something genuine, rather than maintaining a fiction. That peace, that alignment, that's the richness that Looking Poor is pointing toward. And I want you to notice something right now. If this message landed for you, if something in the last 20 minutes shifted even slightly, if you felt some recognition or some relief or some activation in your chest, that's not an accident. That's you recognizing something true. The real you, not the performance you, already knows this. Already knows that the costume isn't working. Already knows that there's a different way to live. That part of you has been waiting for permission. Consider this your permission. Share this video with one person in your life who you think needs to hear it. Not to judge them, not to lecture them, just because you care about them and you think this shift could do for them what it's done for the people in these stories. Because the best thing you can give someone isn't a signal of your status. It's a real idea that could change their life. We are living in a pivotal moment. The old game, the spend to signal game, is breaking down. People are waking up to it. The debt is too heavy. The performance is too exhausting. The loneliness it creates is too painful. A new way of measuring success is emerging. Not by what you own, by how you live. Not by what people think, by who you actually are. The quietest people in the room are often the most powerful. The most ordinary-looking lives often contain the most extraordinary freedom. The person drives, but something is different now. Because now you can see the machine. And once you can see the machine, you have a choice that you didn't have before. You can step back into it and keep feeding it, or you can step away and start building something real. Real wealth is quiet. Real confidence doesn't need an audience. Real success doesn't require a performance. And the most powerful thing you will ever do is become so secure in who you are and what you're building that you genuinely do not need anyone else to believe in it yet. That is the new rich. And it's available to you, right now, exactly as you are. Go build.